Okay, so this is video number 2. I'm not sure if it's going to make me separated or end early because I haven't done this in a row on this phone, so we'll find out. So thank you so much for tuning in, sharing this now moment with myself and with one another. And if you haven't seen these videos, welcome. Welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness in the highest levels of love light. So this is part 2. I was talking about body changes. I was talking about the narrative that we're feeding ourselves. So if you haven't watched video number 1, this won't all make sense. So I invite you to go back and watch that if you feel guided to. I will do some light language, maybe just a little inflow message from my higher self. And if I have time, in fact, I'll roll into that. So in a nutshell, I just kind of want to wrap up the last video. What are we feeding ourselves? And do we still need to feed ourselves the same thing we felt the need to a month ago, a week ago, a year ago, 6 months ago? You know, how long have we been in this? Because as I mentioned before, I feel this, and I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but I feel like it's a full moon, new moon all the time right now. It's like clear, receive, clear, create, 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 let's clear. And there's no necessarily, if we're not giving our body what it needs in order to recognize that we do have the power and the capability to see through, read between the lines, as I was saying in the last video, we're just going to keep mapping back into the same system. We're going to keep dropping a pin in that same map. And then what that does is it creates grooves in our get into the groove, right? It creates the same movement patterns. It creates the same algorithms. It creates the same habit patterns, and we become addicted to these certain sources that we're feeding off of, not necessarily recognizing. It can be very subtle, and it can be with anything. It can be even other light workers. It could be light language. For a while when I first started hearing light language, I was obsessed. I couldn't get enough of it because I recognized I do this. This is within me. And I was fascinated by it. And it was beautiful and useful. And I gobbled it up. And then I was already doing it. And I would tune along with others. But that isn't the know-all, end-all, be-all, right? It isn't just about light language. It isn't just about any of this. There is a whole new world, right? And it doesn't have to be one particular narrative that we're constantly tuning into. There comes a point where the value that we give it, is it giving us the same value in return? So it's just balance, that's all. All right, so where I wanted to go with this, to piggyback off that last video, is let's go a little deeper. So whenever I'm in session with someone or having a conversation, especially with my family members, the question I always ask is why? So there are certain narratives that many of us are plugging into, whether it be mainstream or not mainstream, that tell us what's going on. We'll say the chicken after the egg, right? It's in that order. But they don't necessarily tell us everything that's going on, right? And do we really need to know everything that's going on? And it's interesting for many of us. It's curious, and it does give us this like, wow, I love learning about new things. It's stimulating. But then the question becomes, as I said in the last video, what are we stimulating? Are we constantly stimulating our cortisol, our anger, our frustration, our fear, our waiting on something to happen, our future tripping, our living in the past, right? It's important to know certain things. But as Cryon always says, we don't know what we don't know. I haven't listened to Cryon in quite some time, but I did. He was part of my awakening, and so I love to share. Lee Carroll channels Cryon. If you don't know who that is, just good messages in general. My point is that from what I'm seeing in my own experience, from my own perspective, is always why? Why this narrative? And fill in the blanks. Health, government, technology, right? Our phones, our computers, earth changes, right? Social, financial structures. So fill in the blanks, and whatever narrative that we've been tuning into, that could be the subject matter. So let's say what we're putting into our bodies. Huge subject matter right now. Or what we're not putting into our bodies. Why? Right? We start to pay attention to who and what and when, and we're starting to understand why. But again, reading between the lines, finding that deeper layer. And we could go into so many different places and talk about why this person did that, and who's doing what, and who they really are, and what lineage they're really from, and what the agendas are of these groups, okay? But there comes, let's go deeper, why? It's like a 2-year-old, why, Mom? Why? 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 Well, because this. Well, why? And the deeper level, really what it boils down to from what my guidance team always shares with me is because we're magical beings. Because we are so much more powerful, so much more magic, so much more capable of wonderful creations. And it's all been hidden from us. From one perspective, it's always been available if we looked hard enough, right? You know, it's in all the great books, and yes, civilizations have been wiped out because of this truth being hidden. And it's important to know our history, and it's important to know what's going on so that we're educated on what we're doing to our bodies or not doing. But ultimately, above and beyond all of that, I'm just using that as an example. It's important to educate ourselves on what group is working for the greater good in full alignment with sovereignty and what groups aren't. So that is all relevant to a certain extent in our story and on our reality here on Earth as humans, right? Living in our towns, going to our schools, going to our jobs. But what I really want to hone in on is why? Keep going deeper, 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 deeper. And the heart of the matter is the heart of the matter. So I talked a lot in the last video just about honoring our bodies and all of that, but we are changing. We are becoming more connected to who we really are. And as we do this, the narrative gets louder. The chaos seems more prevalent. And it's a lot. And it creates scrambled eggs. Here we are, beautiful yolks of oneness, golden yolks of energy, starting off in the womb, right, of creation, in the womb of Mother Earth, in the wombs of our mothers, connected to our fathers through our natural birth cycle, right? But all of a sudden, scramble, 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 all of that going on. Why? So if we just get to the juice, and it's really all about the human and all about the heart, and I'm not saying those other narratives aren't important. I'm not saying that that's not the purpose of this video. It's to get to the nugget of truth, which is we are magical beings. We are creators that make manifest. And I say manifest and the word feast comes through because I was talking in my previous video about feeding energy nutrition, but it's a feast, right? It's a celebration. I'm going to go into a little flow in this video. But it becomes this concept that, so I'm hearing conceptualization. So why? And if we just sit back and recognize, whoa, we are capable of so much. We're capable of beautiful technology. There becomes this question, and I think I'm going to do a separate video with just the light language. Apologies, I keep saying that I'm going to do light language and a flow, but I'm going to do that separately because I want to really go into this deeper. This is my dog streaming. Isn't that cute? He's asleep. I want to go into a deeper space of balance. So we know all these things, and we have all of this education about what's going on from what we're giving ourselves the nutrition of, whatever shows we're watching or podcasts we're listening to or truths that we're discovering. But what are we doing to balance that out? What are we creating in order to offset those things? If that's our focus, meaning if we're focusing so deeply on what is being expressed, expelled, exposed, what are we doing to balance out that feeling of cortisol that comes up in the body, or confusion, or fear, or depression, or anger, or frustration, right? I think I've experienced all those things, especially in the last year. And the simple things are what I talked about before: breathing, eating the right foods, paying attention to our body, unplugging, grounding, moving, doing things that bring us joy on a consistent basis. So it isn't just anymore about just doing it 10 minutes a day. It isn't, because if we're spending and giving value to 4 hours a day of podcasts and videos and TV or books or newspaper articles or the internet, then not to say that time is the balance, because we could do 4 hours of meditation that we're not really in our hearts because we think we are, but we spent 4 hours trying to meditate and never quite got there, right? I could go back and forth about all of that. How many times have I done that? Quite a few. Because I wasn't paying attention to my intuition, which told me, guess what? You need to go for a run and then meditate. Sometimes I'll work with somebody and I will guide them through a guided meditation before we do energy work. Or I'll work with someone and I'll say, let's do some movement patterns before I do a reading. Because that person may be in resistance and in a place of heightened cortisol where they're not able to receive the messages or the energy that we're about to share. So that's something that's important for maybe healers and light workers out there. And it allows us to just, oh, okay, now I'm feeling it. Oh, I see that. Whereas before, we may not have seen it before if we hadn't moved and let that energy, stuck energy, move through us. So why? Squirrel, lost my train of thought again. So much coming in right now. I'm just going to sit with this for a moment. This allows us to release old patterns, and it allows us to get unstuck from the grooves that we have grooved into our brain, into our neurological network that we've mapped ourselves into. Some of us have mapped ourselves into a box or a corner, and it's time to reorganize our patterns and move them into a different space so that we can shift. We can make that shift. Okay, pause. Okay, so it's balancing that out. So for example, what I was guided to kind of tap into was, if we are learning, what are we creating? because learning is really valuable. Listening to light language and feeling the shifts can be very valuable and helpful. But there comes a point when we're here to create our own story, our own journey. And it may not be through light language. It might be through dance. It might be through science. It might be through math. You know, all of those things are beautiful, living, moving ways of expression. It doesn't have to be the same sounds that somebody else is creating or has created or that has been created before. So balancing out, I used the time as an example, 4 hours on the internet, then 4 hours doing meditation. That's not necessarily balancing. It's balancing it out with that heart space coherence so that we get into a habitual pattern of holding that long energy so that we're not scrambled. Because we might have 10 minutes of that and 4 hours of scramble. So what's going to happen? What one is outweighing, outvaluing the other. And we don't get into that golden frequency of the yoke, of the yoga, right? The yoking, coming together in oneness. And it doesn't mean you have to do yoga to do that, but it's a valuable tool as well. So the bigger picture is, what are we creating? So if we are in a place where, let's say you're a school teacher and you're very aware of what's happening in the schools, of the narrative that's being taught, that maybe isn't 100, is one end. In the first video, I talked about mainstream and not mainstream. Both of them can be polarized, by the way, in case we haven't noticed. But maybe you're a school teacher and you're in this space of recognizing that some of the narratives that are being taught are not what I want to teach, or that I want my child to learn. And so maybe creating, I think maybe Michaela Sheldon talked about this. She's got, I'll have to provide that link. I can't remember the name of the link now, but Michaela Sheldon they have a whole group that's doing homeschooling, right? So being the change. I don't believe in this. This isn't true for me. This is not, and I'm inviting you not to get hung up on the words I'm using. This just doesn't feel right. This isn't something I can, with integrity, teach anymore. Or I want my children to be ingesting, right? So create your own group or school or teaching network in which a group can come together and be more balanced energetically with integrity, right? Perhaps this is the same with mainstream, with medical. It could be that moving into a holistic combination. Maybe you're a scientist, combining certain things and finding that balance in order to, the word that I kept hearing was balance. It's like, okay, we've got all this truth coming out. What are we doing to balance out these energetic realities of things that have already been created? So all of these, when I say truths, it's layer on top of layer on top of layer. Okay, so it's realities that were created that are now being brought to the surface that we're learning about. We're seeing it. What are we doing to balance that out? So if we're seeing that there's a huge population of little people that have been mistreated, maybe we create a community for young teenagers, women, children, whatever, that have been mistreated, and introduce to them programs. I say program with love, like meditation, dance, art, to help them heal. It could be about technology that we're learning about, or it could be that we're creating technology. It's about us stepping up into our own power, into our own sovereignty, and embodying this higher version of us. And that's the message that I keep getting. Because that old I'm hearing dimensionality, dementia, where we forgot, where we ignored, where we were feeding a network that maybe we didn't know we were feeding. Now we know, to a certain extent. We may not know how deep that goes, but again, I invite you to come back to why. I don't necessarily need to follow it down to the rabbit hole and find exactly where it began, because it branches out into so many. Picture an anthill, right? And all those little tunnels are collapsing. Okay, and they all lead to so many places, and everything is intertwined. But ultimately, what can I do about that? Oh, so-and-so told me this is happening. Can you believe it? Well, wow, I don't know. But here's what I'm going to do to counter that. If you are a business owner full of integrity and you're interested in transportation, start creating your own company based on transportation that doesn't involve any sort of trafficking. That involves maybe conscious people driving all over, like many of us are doing, and blessing the land. Going to sacred sites where certain monstrosities have happened and bringing your gifts there to bless the land. Planting crystals. This seems so, well, that I just went woo-woo, but I'm trying to merge the two because that's essentially what's happening. We're merging the spirituality with our logical and physical manifestation on how we can come together as a community in diversity and each bring to the table our own unique blueprint that we can help to counteract the waves of scrambledness that's been going on for a long time. So what can we do? So it's coming together in these communities. Some people are still in that space where they're just learning about this. It's almost like there's different layers of, what is it called? Of grief. Some people are still in the grieving where they're like, I can't believe this is what happened. So once we move through that grief, some of us are required to assist others in working through that grief. Some people are healers that are here to assist perhaps certain areas that have been heavily hit in the economic department. And they can come in and start groups to feed, not just feed the homeless, but to help connect families with activities that can bring more knowingness about grounding, about meditation, about breathing. Do you know how many people don't breathe properly? It seems little. A lot of us want to make these huge changes, but then do nothing at all because we can be so overwhelmed with everything that we're tapping into. It doesn't take, and if all of us did that, and we weren't just focused on what we're hearing about and what we're learning about, but we're focusing on part of that, counter to that, that can shift things immediately. Because then when we do that, we meet other people, we meet our soul group. We go to parts of the earth that have been waiting for us to come visit there. We connect with the elementals that have been forgotten. We remember that part of our ancestry. We can mourn together over certain losses that we felt. And then in doing that, we help to integrate those energies. And then we come together so that that doesn't happen again in the future. It isn't just about talking about it so it doesn't happen again. It is taking compassionate action. If you're involved in politics, creating different programs within this new system that'll support the new reality. I could go on and on. Be creative with it. Use our imaginations. And I'm going to end this all coming back to the magic that we are. We aren't taught this in school growing up. And again, I'm bringing it back to the beginning of the first video and this video that I did. Number 2. We aren't taught this in school, and the question is why? And again, we could branch out into all these anthills or rabbit holes. Well, it's because of this. Well, it's because of that. Oh, well, did you know that that's connected to this? And it's because of that. And I would say, yes, all of that may be true in a certain reality, from a certain perspective, in a certain dimension. But overall, as we move through that, we are powerful creators. So it's those little steps that don't seem so big that really add up. And if you're capable of doing something massive and having a huge, massive change and creating a community, I bring up food too as well, because there's been a lot about, things in our water, modification of our foods. Okay, if that's something that you don't want to support, talking about it is important, but work with farmers on creating more organic produce. Start your own farm. Create a community garden. Teach children how to grow their own food. Now, I'm sharing this because that's not my gift. My husband jokes that for plants, I certainly do. He calls me a plant murderer, and I'm not proud of that. I've gotten better. But it takes, my grandmother had a green thumb. She could grow anything. I will overwater, I underwater, but even that is shifting for me. I'm starting to intuitively pay attention to how the plant responds, and I'm not just being a bull in a china shop. We talked about that in the live video that I did with Candace and Jess. I'm not like water, water, water. Must be done I start to do the research and I start to feel, and this plant says it needs a lot of water, but I think I'm overwatering it. Again, it's paying attention, reading between the lines, checking in with our body, checking in with the plant life. So if that's your gift, then why are we wasting our gifts? We're not really wasting, but why are we putting them on hold so that we can feed our curiosity? So that we can feed the cortisol. And I'm not saying it's not important at times. Again, everything is relevant based on where we're at in our journey. So my guides are saying the journey is us. So what are we choosing to experience? And I've called myself many times a shadow eater. I get this information, I dream about it, I see it, I digest it, I integrate it, and I do it now from a very close to neutral space. Not always. Sometimes it's more challenging than others. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that because I wasn't as in tune. And that's just part of the journey, part of the process. So again, coming back into this intuitive working with the earth, if we are feeling that there's too many frequencies being blasted at us right now, then maybe we can change the units in our house. We can look into some natural ways to counter those frequencies. We can work with our school board by using science in order to counter that. Are you an architect? Great, look into Dan Winter, right? Or a builder, construction site. Using and combining these forces in order to create our new world that we are craving, right? And a lot of us are saying it's already here. And from a timeless, infinite, multidimensional perspective, that's true. But from a human perspective that is living in a time-based reality, even though that's shifting, it still requires work. And that work is different for each individual unique blueprint and expression of life. What may be work for me may not be work for somebody else. Gardening for me is work, even though I love it. Somebody else is just fun and beautiful and natural. Well, intuitively, when I work with people, sometimes they go, I don't know what my gifts are. I don't have any. Everybody has them. We just might be so wrapped up in our logical left brain analytical thinking or the narrative that's going on outside that it's created a disconnect. We are not recognizing that there's something that's been nudging us. And sometimes it takes somebody else pointing that out, and that's okay. We've got each other. The theme for this week is you've got a friend. Lean on me, right? By doing these things and following our intuition and being in our hearts, we find our soul group. Reach out. Work with somebody in the community. I really like what you're doing. Can you show me? Can we do this together? I'd really like to create whatever it might be. And if that person doesn't want to connect, then it just wasn't the right time. Or it might be that you're just on a different place right now. Doesn't mean it won't always be the right time. Sometimes we have to find our groove by, I hear it, moving through our fear of rejection. That's something else, because we don't want to reach out because people might think we're crazy. What do you mean you want to do a meditation group? That's just too woo-woo. Well, here's the science behind it. Arm ourselves with the science that is not necessarily the only science that's being blasted at us. Find those articles, find those researchers. We can all build this way, and you might be surprised, right? You might have someone that you just talk to that right person, they go, yeah, let's give it a try. Let's see how this feels at this school or in this boys or girls club, right? Meditation. Oh, let's give it a try. Maybe it's not called meditation. Maybe it's called mind relaxation, right? Maybe it's called imagination hour. I love that. All right, in love and light, I'll do the next one with a little bit of energy share, a little bit of inflow wordplay, and maybe some light language if you feel guided to watch that. So thank you so much for tuning in. In love and light, guys. I'm hearing keep on trucking, right? As I saw trucks on a skateboard. Anyways, in love and light, guys, namaste. Riding the waves.